I am Ellen Austin Lee, an alum of LaSalle University's Solstice MFA in Creative Writing program. Welcome again to our Winter 2023 Evening Reading Series, with today's edition featuring Solstice Poetry and Pedagogy Track faculty member Kathleen Aguero and poet, translator, educator, editor, and guest faculty member Jennifer Dean. As we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to acknowledge that the territory on which LaSalle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and the Massachusetts people. LaSalle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history of the Native and Indigenous communities who continue to reside in the area currently known as Massachusetts, and the continued efforts of their community leaders to ensure that history is not oversimplified or lost. This statement is one small step in acknowledging the difficult history that brought us to reside on this land, and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land is itself a colonial concept, and we acknowledge that the ideal restorative measure is to return land to Native and Indigenous communities. The Solstice MFA program of LaSalle University seeks ways to be part of a better future going forward. As we grow, we pledge to seek out Native writers for our faculty and guest faculty. And meanwhile, we have established the DeBruce Fellowship for Native and Indigenous writers, which will be granted to an incoming Solstice student annually. We hope to inspire others to take action as well. One way you might do so is to consider a gift to the Native Land Conservancy based in the area commonly known as Mashpee, Massachusetts. More information can be found at www.nativelandconservancy.org. First up tonight, we have Solstice faculty member Kathleen Aguero, who will be introduced by graduating poetry student. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Pardon me, I have the order wrong. First up tonight, we will have poet and translator and educator and guest faculty member Jennifer Dean, who will be introduced by LaSalle University's Solstice MFA Creative Writing Program's Assistant Director, Quentin Collins. And then we will have Solstice faculty member Kathleen Aguero, who will be introduced by graduating poetry student Deborah Harper Bono. Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you, Ellen. And I will assure you all that was all because of an audible. Ellen, you had the correct order all along. It's in you. It's always been within you. All right. Hello, I am Quentin Collins, Assistant Director of the Solstice MFA program of LaSalle University, here to introduce our guest faculty member, Jennifer Jean. I learned of Jennifer and her work the way I come across many writers these days, social media. And after following her online and then seeing her myriad achievements over time, I was gifted with the wonderful surprise that not only was she a local writer, but also she was an instructor at Pine Manor College, where our program used to live. I am thrilled that I now have the opportunity to meet Jennifer and hear from her read her work. Jennifer's forthcoming poetry book is Vows, which is forthcoming from Lilly Poetry Review Books this year. Prior to Vows, she published Object Lesson, also from Lilly Poetry Review Books, a work that centers on sex trafficking and objectification in America. Jennifer is also has a resource book of the same title, Object Lesson, a guide to writing poetry. This is where I speak slower now. Her other books include The Fool, The Archivist, and In the War. Beyond her own writings, she's the co-editor and co-translator of an anthology in development titled Other Paths for Scheherazade, Contemporary Poetry by Arab Women. Her poems, prose, and co-translations have appeared in Poetry Magazine, Rattle, The Common, On the Seawall, Waxwing, Terrain, and as an American Academy of Poets Poem a Day. One of the earliest of Jennifer's poems I recall reading is The Pacific, which appeared in the September 2018 issue of Poetry Magazine. So it's been some while I've been following. I enjoy how the poem begins with dense imagery that lends subtext through its angularity to the scenery of its setting and destination. Jennifer writes, "There were no roads. I remember no roads, the deep depth of the cliffs we motored along. I remember speed in a parched Chevy clunker that could not have sped, and bench seats and no buckles and bare thighs peeling off full leather at every hairpin." Jennifer has earned fellowships from the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, Disquiet Xanth Books, and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. And she received the Ambassador for Peace Award from the Women's Federation for World Peace. Very, very decorated. That's not even interesting. That's what I could think. Her other accolades include the 2016 Good Bones Poetry Prize. Additionally, she is an organizer and co-translator of Arabic poetry for the Her Story Is Collective, edits poetry for Talking Writing, and translations for Consequence Forum, and is the program manager for 24 Pearl Street, the Fine Arts Work Center's online writing program. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer to the stage.
Thank you so much, Quentin, and thank you for welcoming me so warmly here, and thank you, Meg, for welcoming me. I think that originally I was supposed to come here about 2.5 years ago. So this is a long time in the making, and I really enjoyed my class that I guest taught on Monday. It was literary citizenship in a poetic sequence, and so what I wanted to do for my reading is to read several sequences, because that's usually how I write. I'm a project writer, at least for now, project writer. And so I have a lot of different projects, i.e. sequences to choose from. First of which is my book here, Object Lesson, that I want to read from. I think that you said this, Quentin, that it's a book that explores human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, and objectification in America. And so a lot of work went into this project, and I really enjoyed the workshop that I taught, because I could sort of go over my process a little bit without directly going into it too much. But yeah, I'm just going to share one poem. It's a really intense poems, and I'm feeling very jovial tonight, so I don't want to read too many of these because I'm sticking with my joyful mood. This poem is an acrostic. It's for survivors of abuse and trafficking who reside at the Breaking Free Steakhouse in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's called Bird. Rock wren, godwit, bobolink. What are we looking at? What's beaked and broken free from a classic iron bell cage with a blown out hole opposite a latched door? No thickened keratin could peck that well. No claw-turned fist busted up that joint. Inside, she was key. She was cheap. She was a flipped bad finger. Now this bird wings, as every bird stepping out of the life, with no credit, no reference, and a little self-love. What are we looking at? A second wind, a flight inside the creature that is the holy eternal verb, is who bent the metal, is the mother of a lighter bone, the kind that terror cannot allow. Okay, so after I finished Object Lesson, which, as I said, is quite intense, a lot of the poems are based on interviews as well as research. So yeah, I'm feeling it right now. It's been a while since I've read from that book because I have another book, as Quentin mentioned, coming out with more sequences, one of which is a kind of ekphrastic poem called The Saturation. And that term saturation I invented because I wanted to find a term for a kind of ekphrastic that has to do with an audio experience. And so I found myself, probably as many of you, obsessively listening to a single song or just listening to or watching a YouTube video of one song over and over and over. And then I would produce a poem and I was like, that's gotta be a thing. And I looked it up, it's not. So now all of you know it's a saturation. So I'm gonna read two of these, actually no, three of these saturations, two of which are from this upcoming book, Voz. Voz is voice in Portuguese, so it goes along with the saturations. And this saturation is based on the entire discography of The Doors, the band The Doors. And if you happen not to know The Doors, that's okay. So I get into the poem, I'm sure you can dig it. And what else can I say about this poem? It mentions Cabo Verde, which means Cape Verde. Those are the islands that my ancestors on my father's side are from. And what else? I'm not sure what else, but yeah, as I said, you can all dig it, get into the groove of it. It's called The Doors of Perception. Oh, I know one more thing. It's based on a family legend that my father was supposed to be the drummer for The Doors. Right? He tried out, he didn't make it, he almost made it. He knew those guys, he didn't know them actually. He never was almost the drummer for The Doors. He was just obsessed. He was a fanatic. All right, so this is The Doors of Perception. My father leapt on stage at the Hollywood Bowl to grab drum and cymbal sticks from a star. He wanted to be a star, a door, white. Security thugs dragged him off John Densmore. He saw doors everywhere. He saw doors everywhere at the Whiskey, the Beanery, the Magic Mountain Fest, and in primary colors in Windward, Oakwood, or north of Rose. He wanted to forget war in Venice, to be a door in Venice, and face the faux canals. Later, he flew to Paris to pay homage to the door who died with a head of Alexandrian hair. He carried huge pale poppies to the Poet's Corner and the Père Lachaise, to this stranger under a cream coffin door nailed shut. He said, break on through. He put a poppy in his pocket like a receipt and chased daylight till he landed in LA. Saw a wave of white stars rippling on the Pacific on new moon nights, when the ever-present rust crowd was blown out to sea. He found the motel room door, particle door, and shut it on all that he owned for 50 years. He lived there, adding up primary colors, hour to hour in bliss consciousness, crossing his legs on the bed, letting electric snow hush the TV, hush gunfire and blood. He forgot his father's Cabo Verde and let himself be Italian there, a different kind of Venetian, because who he really was too close to Black. So that end line refers to Cape Verde people. Cape Verde Islands are located off the coast of West Africa. They're mixed race people. So yeah, that's something my father struggled with. Okay, so this next saturation is based on the album Against the Wind, which is from the 70s, Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. Again, you don't have to know. If you know it, you know you love it, I hope. If you don't know it, it's okay. Again, just get into the groove. The last poem I read, I neglected to say, is located, the landscape, as are all the Voz poems. Landscape is in California, Southern California, LA area. And so is this poem located there. And a lot of the poems in Voz, the saturations, are based on music that was dubbed the California sound at the time, the 70s, maybe early 80s could be included in there, possibly. But yeah, that California sound. So this one, Against the Wind. All horses and homeless folk go to the beach when fires rip through California canyons. They run through surf against the wind, away from the flame of the night. When the choke smoke dies, they canter home to campfire stones, tent poles, push carts, hoof brush wire, salt block racks, and spoons, the flats of certain spatulas. Not everything unnatural is gone. In the fortified Getty Museum, St. Martin dividing his cloak with a beggar, the piebald horse, and Van Gogh's irises are safe too. Sometimes I feel less than a work of art, like a horse awash in a wave, not ablaze. Like I'm home free when the ash is thick on ground I've slept on for months. Sometimes I wait for miles of asters, blue dicks, and desert pincushions for an after fire super bloom to feel useful, creative, though I know that's as unwise as a California breeze after a decade of drought. Okay, so last saturation, this did not make it into those, pretty much because I just wrote it pretty recently, even though I associated a little bit with the themes and bows about my family. Is this located in California? No. But in any case, there's this anthology coming out called Dear Yusef. It's being put together by Nicole Seeley and John Mario. And they put out a call, poems about Yusef Kumunyako related to him or inspired by him. He is a literary hero of mine, probably like everybody here. So I just put myself to the task, and I thought, okay, everybody's going to write about, probably his most famous book, Dien Kai Dao. Sorry for mispronouncing that, but the one about the Vietnam War. And I decided to take my inspiration from his book, Copacetic, I believe it's called. So this one has to do with that, and it's a saturation because I started listening to, I think I mentioned this to earlier in an earlier conversation, listen to Judy Garland a lot. I like jazz, so when Judy sings jazz, it's good. And she's in that movie, A Star Is Born, and she's singing The Man That Got Away. Oh my God, watch it on YouTube. It's just amazing. So I just watched that maybe 1,000 times, I don't know, lots. And then this is the poem that resulted from that. And it does mention, again, my father and brother, and towards the end, it says, Dear Yusef. So apparently it was enough. They took this poem for that, and you'll find it in that anthology. And it has an epigraph from the movie A Star Is Born. Judy says, you don't know what it's like to watch somebody you love crumble away bit by bit. And the poem is called Copacetic Judy. In the blue after hour, every chair's upended, meaning late and early. The bee tenders turned each bulb to crepuscule, the meanest light. And Judy tunes the muted trumpet with her Alma Immortale. All of 32, and worn with knowing, with belting, shoving those bangs off with hope you burn up. Gosh, golly, why should anyone bother with a comeback high? Because genius turns up, and why that dress? Bow at the throat, midnight azul, cutting her at some dreamt up waistline, not her waistline, but she's torching Arlen and Gershwin like a copacetic Frances Ethel, like woman. She reminds me of Sylvia Plath, callous on the voice, bitter self-killer, queen contralto, ugly duck, a kind of jazzy fado. He's there in the shadow of the bar, dark liquid, the man that got her Dave, Vin, Sid, Mark, Nick, etc. stand-in, my father, brother stand-in. I'm the scene on repeat. I saturate and tune and, quote unquote, art and life bleed into each, as you say, dear Yusef. We saturate in what we want drawn out, like an Epsom bath pulling at atomized shrapnel. Your surface stings as the hard love of the deeper wound comes clean. First time I read that over 1 minute, so that's why I'm lighting up. I probably have a little bit of a rush. Okay. So Both is a chapbook actually, and it comes from a larger project based also in the same landscape, California, the LA area. And that manuscript, I'm shopping it around, it's called The Pacific, has those saturations in it, but it also has a lot of urban eco poems. You know, I think they're eco poems. I say they are, so they are. So I want to read just actually, I don't know what time I'm at. I don't know if I have too much time, but I'll read two. I'll go pretty quick. This one's fun in a really Hitchcockian way. It's based on a news article, best inspiration for poems, I think. It's called "We Don't Know Who Killed the Peacocks in Palos Verdes." Real story. We don't know who garroted, who poisoned with Windex, who sped up and ran down the blue-eyed feathers, who pellet shot, carbine shot, slingshot, bow and arrowed, bludgeon bloody, all those things, who twisted and snapped. We love the peacocks in Palos Verdes, except when we hate their mating screech all summer, their omelet-sized shit, and gang of males as tall children, slow strutting mid-street every day. Every day, their beak marks edging flora for miles, their face-off assaults against their own reflections. We know one of us hates beauty bigger than a bee. I bet we shuffle up the slopes of Palos Verdes with a guy whose aim is true. Oh, the poor peafowl, over 50 plus as of writing, feather folk are gone, who didn't ask to be here, to be a symbol of a prior swindle, to be a flying flower adorning the borders of someone's property, to be strangers to nature. But that's who we are, right? We bring things home, we move them around town, we obliterate the fad. And this is the last in the Pacific series, and then I'm just going to read a translation. And I chose this one before I came, but it's the Pacific, the one you were talking about, Quentin. I'm going to read that for all of you. It's the core poem of that bigger manuscript. All right. The Pacific. There were no road rails. I remember no road rails in the depth off the cliffs we motored along. I remember speed in a parched Chevy clunker that could not have sped, and bench seats, and no buckles, and bare thighs peeling off faux leather at every hairpin. Every elevated canyon mile was a feat, but a breath of less thickened air too, less cog and fume, a winding away from the wavering sea lake steam off blinding sidewalks, infinite sidewalks, and other shoeless kids kicking rusted palm leaves outside infinite apartment complexes, away from our corner of the valley of concrete corners, of no evidence of valley besides boulders stacked in the distance of every vista. The driver was a stranger, was my mother, after my whole life had passed with stranger after stranger, was my mother after 7 years, me at 7 years, with her driving that snuff-colored Nova from her blinding valley, not a valley, through Laurel, Topanga, Malibu canyons, all the way to some fantastic, to her beloved blue eucalyptus choking local growth the whole trek. And the cooling air as we efforted west, and the jolt of a castle, the castle, in a distant crook of a range that hid the slate of the ocean, made me want to stop moving, but not stop here. I remember hoping to find hermit crabs the size of the mole on my right side chin. And if I tethered them to a stick, they'd line up by mass and trade shells, find homes that fit, and there'd be one left without, one torn out. A book said a scientist leaned into wet sand, watched a torn crab die in the beak of a gull. And I can't remember if I saw that death or read it. I remember watching a wrong castle tucked into a wrong mountain notch on the chin of the sky, like the hermit mole on my chin if my face were the sky. It's a beauty mark, my mother had said. Don't pick at it. I eyed that smoking stranger at the wheel and dug my nail in as the Pacific swelled into view that first time. Okay. I did a little Freudian slip with the line about the stranger, you know. My mom felt like a stranger at that time. And also that book explores, and this poem mentions just or hints at, I wasn't with my parents for 7 years of my life. I was in foster care. My brother and I were. So a lot of the poems cover that. A few in Bose do too, but not as many. So yeah, that's what that one's about. And I just wanted to end on a translation. So now we got the poem sequence for the about human trafficking, and then the saturations, and then the eco poems. So now another project kind of sequence is this translation series. Quentin mentioned I work with a group called Her Story Is, a group of American artists of all kinds, working with Arab women artists, mostly from Iraq, because that's the coordination that the group was starting with. And I work on translation teams and also on teams working on other kinds of projects. We've met each other once in Dubai. We traveled, we tried to go to Turkey this summer. It didn't happen, darn it, but we're going to meet up again because we have a strong bond of heart. And so out of that group and all the projects we're working on, I co-editing and co-translating this group of poems. We're trying to get poems from women of all the 22 Arab nations. And this is one of them. This is my favorite to read. And I just, before I continue, I want to say thank you to Kathleen Aguero for her glasses. I'm trying to remember the poems as I'm reading them because it's a little bit wonky to see out of her glasses, but it's helping. So yeah, I can still see. All right. So this is one of my favorite ones to read aloud though. It's by Moroccan poet Zakia El Marmouk, and I translated it with Amr Al-Izraqi. And it's called I Sleep in My Inkwell and Wave to the Distant. To those who enter the fire with boats, who touch heaven with kites, who stuff roof holes with clouds, who hide under beds whenever the road stutters in the throat of footfalls entering fog, of footfalls that never return from the checkpoint, which only sends back bodies. To those who resort to the inkwell when speech narrows, who plant nails in their blood whenever the wall slouches, more and more nails, so the lover's image does not fade into the traffic of silence. To those who collect their own ashes whenever their pillow is dry, whenever there's absence, who aren't tired of waving to loves in the distance whenever maps are locked. To those who venture into meadows before the waters flow, who keep the keys whenever they know the doors were stolen, who leave their crutch on the threshold of the unknown whenever life leaves them behind. To those who know themselves through their wounds whenever the war sleeps in their eyes, while reassuring the subjects of war. To all those, I say, the forest begins with a tree. Let your left hand, which keeps the throne, shake your right hand. Maybe dreams hatch between them. Okay, yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you so much.
One right first. Can you guys hear me? Thank you, Jennifer. That was marvelous. I didn't know your work before, and I think I speak for everyone that we're all going to know your work going forward. Hi, again. I'm Deborah Harper Bono, graduating poetry student in the Solstice Creative Writing Program at LaSalle University. It is my very great pleasure to introduce poet, essayist, and instructor Kathleen Aguero, author of 6 poetry collections including her 2022 release, World Happiness Index. Recipient of Massachusetts and Virginia Center for the Creative Arts Fellowships in Poetry, she has also co-edited 3 volumes of multicultural literature and is consulting poetry editor of Solstice Literary Magazine. Winner of many grants, she teaches workshops in changing lives through literature and creative writing for caregivers, as well as being one of the founding members of the Solstice faculty. Kathy was my first mentor at Solstice, and she is the rigorous hand in the velvet glove. Enthusiastic and precise, generous and incisive, she will tip her head slightly to the side. Love the, had a tiny wobble at the, and her laser insight, make this small change, is always right on the money. She has a gift for creating a space in which her colleagues, and even her first-term students, feel like colleagues when working with her, attain their own voices. Kathy is our champion, guiding us to the best in our own poetry while making sure we bring the reader along. My work is always better for her contribution. In Daughter of, I was hypnotized by her poem sequence about Miranda from Shakespeare's Tempest, the voyage, the arrival in Naples, its streets full of gods, the invocation of memory and dream, gossip and rumor. The book's last poem, November Daybreak, offers a sense that things come round. No wide-eyed innocent, though. In Kathy's most recent book, World Happiness Index, she quietly, inexorably indicts the 19th happiest country in the world for its addiction to dark money, guns, and missing safety nets. Her self-portrait sequence travels from mute self-portrait to self-portrait as angry dog, one of my favorites, to self-portrait as sunrise. Kathy's writing is both utterly realistic and deeply poetic, a duality she manages with the lightest touch, retaining an openness to the world. Writing of her grandson's puddle stomping, she asks, why not raise my face to the sky's wet tumble? Please welcome Kathleen Aguero, a writer who kindly, magically shows us our authentic selves, ragged and glorious.
Yeah, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. The only problem with it is that now I have to read. It's hard to live up to. I'm Kathleen Aguero, one of the poetry faculty at the Solstice MFA at LaSalle. One of the things about teaching at Solstice and being part of the community is being able to attend workshops and seminars by graduate students and by colleagues. And the rich and the rich conversations that we have. Excuse me. So I redid my original reading to sort of respond to some of this wonderful, rich experience I've been having. And so I'm going to read some poems that are old and you may be familiar with, some poems that are very old, you probably haven't heard, and some new poems. And I wanted to read two from World Happiness Index. Happy Skies Spa Reflexology. A neon halo shines above a flashing foot. But when I go inside to buy a gift certificate for my daughter, a young woman shakes her head, adamant in struggling English. No reflexology, body work. Only body work. Back at home, no website. Just online reviews on rubmaps.com. Beautiful masseuse. Try the table shower. It's the balls. To read more, pay and join. I read about a family that traded their daughter for enough money to stop death threats from loan sharks. Does this really happen? Fields poisoned, son dead, daughter on a plane to us. She could be inside that storefront where the shades are always drawn and the sign reads massage or bodywork. No doubt the ones who took her discovered all her useful attributes. Her hands, her mouth, her pretty unlined face. The weekend detective gives me the number of the day detective. The day detective takes a message for the night detective. No one calls back. On the FBI hotline, a woman answers. Rub maps? Usually a tip-off. Was there an ATM? Were the windows shuttered? Here's the reference number. Then we contact you. A month later, the night detective leaves a message, assures me it's under control. And me, white lady in a down coat and boots, appalled, calling the police, the FBI, and warming up a plate of crapping stew. What am I prepared to understand? That young woman gets arrested. Another takes her place. This is a poem I think I've read before about my 5-year-old grandson, Emery, when he was 16 months, and he was quite tolerant, into everything, a little destructive, a little wild. At 16 months, brown and bold. My grandson plucks a marigold poking through a neighbor's white fence, crushes it between his fingers, while I try to remember if it's poisonous. 3 days later, he's alive, so I cross the marigold off my list of potentially lethal flora toddlers might put in your mouths. So far, he has not poked out his eye falling while carrying a stick, something my mother assured me would happen if I ever ran with a stick in my hand. Though he tugs hard at the baby gate, he has not pulled it down. Though he has banged on the window, he has not shattered it, cut himself, or fallen to the pavement 2 stories below. His skin has not turned from brown to blue during a tantrum, and he has grabbed the dog's whiskers without being bitten. He bulldozes his way. He prods and he pushes. He tries to put the whole of the dangerous world in his mouth while I follow, ready to snatch the worst away. When tired, he wobbles, he falls, he cries, but the next day he's walking again. Golden marigold petals stain his brown hand as he carries his stick. So far, no one thinks it's a gun. So somehow Medusa came up in Jose's class, right? And then Tina did a class on the Cancun and the Villanelle. And the Cancun is a form I just get everything tangled in. I just haven't gotten far with it, but I have written some villanelles. And this is a very loose villanelle where rather than the whole line being repeated, maybe a word or a phrase. Medusa. She surfaced from Poseidon's rape alone, but for Athena plaiting snakes into her hair. Who wouldn't want a face that turns a man to stone? The most beautiful of 3 sisters turned organ, but feeling human pain there in the temple where she fought alone. Out of pride, Perseus brought her snakehead home, wedding present for an exiled mother who in despair needed a face to turn her consort into stone. Think how the Trojan women moaned, resisted being ported onto nightmare ships, ravaged by Greeks, not alone, their children watching, plotting to be grown to warriors, or stunned by terror of what they'd share unless they found a face to turn a man to stone. Think of any woman caught in war, in mundane violence, atoning for her body's flesh and bone, praying only she might wake alone. Why wouldn't she want a face to turn men into stone? Really don't hate that. So, and Deb did this workshop on the short poem and resilience. And I don't know whether these poems exemplify resilience, but they meet the qualification of being 13 lines or fewer. alone at home. Each room a cave in your mind, a safe you can lock. No one else breathes its warm air. No other footfalls stir dust. At last you wear the garment of your own desires. At last you remove your crown of false smiles. Cover the mirrors, pull down the shades. Sometimes light within you flickers. Sometimes it dazzles and blinds. And I don't know if this next one is a poem of resilience. Maybe it's a poem of devotion. Long marriage tortoise. The tortoise would rather not creep through the rain across the muddy road, but it does. If it moves faster, it fears it might lose the race. In fact, devoted to the companion will plod forward, small pebbles, cool earth on its rounded feet. The tortoise does not care about the race. It would take too long for the slow-speaking tortoise to name its humble blessings. It has grown to enjoy the weight of its stone shell, fused and indistinguishable from its body. Now, these other poems, no one in Solstice is to blame for but myself. This is called, I like winter. I'm one of the few people maybe who does, but this is called Why I Can't Write a Poem About Summer, a poem with a quote from Andrew White. Women in sandals display pedicures, each toenail a different color as they waft by in floaty dresses, wide-brimmed hats trimmed with flowers. And look, there goes a purple parasol. Teenage girls in cutoffs bare their midriffs, flash rings in their pierced navels. Men, too, bellies plank, taut, or inflated like sails in the wind. Tattooed bodies covered with snakes, vines, skulls, U.S. flags. At the pool, I don't dare take my eyes off my grandchildren, lest their floaties deflate. I'm too busy to notice the yammering smells of coconut sunscreen, fried clams, beer, and sweat. When I stay up late to write about summer, my neighbors host parties of loud rock music. In the morning, I pick up my pen and the birds start to chatter. All day, people mill around the streets, sit outside at cafes. I can't find a quiet place to concentrate. Who can meet summer's expectations? Go to the beach, watch the sun rise, set, tend the garden, sip gin and tonics on a sailboat while wind tosses your hair like a salad. Be happy, happy, happy. Have fun. Heat slaps my face like a steamy blanket. My feet swell, my hands swell. I'm confined to the room with an air conditioning unit, venturing out only to the mall with its cool cinema smelling of stale popcorn. Winter, blunt and gray, I'm at ease. Quote, something waits beneath it, a whole story doesn't show. End quote. Winter growls, you're okay, good enough. Zip up that long down coat. Pull a wool hat over your ears. Wrap your face in a muffler. Here's a sharp icicle. Here's snow. Break the cold. This one for Amy Hoffman, who like me loves Sicily. I lived in Sicily when I was a child, like maybe the 1960s. It was a very different place than it is now. And so this poem is from a young child's point of view. Emilio. When my father was away, Emilio, the man's servant from across the street, had to come and kill the rat we'd seen. He walked up the stairs, passing dark shapes made by lizards climbing vines along the window. He must have loosed its body from the trap, but I thought he killed it with his hands. The house where Emilio worked was a miniature palace, like the one on the Walt Disney Alley. Turrets and towers, windows narrow as a scratch, no heavy shutters like the ones we closed every afternoon. And once I overheard Mother saying that on Saturday nights, and normally dressed up like a woman. He's gorgeous, she added, widening her eyes. Late afternoon, Emilio hung over the iron fence to chat with us American children and teach us the words to popular songs. Come prima to se prima, ciao ciao bambino. We trade lines back and forth. His voice filled the space between our houses. The delivery boys carrying bread on their rusty bicycles rode by singing. The eggman on his rounds. Even the goat herd plodding alongside his animals might join in, waving his long stick in the air. Back home, we knew only crazy people sang in the streets. Back home, we would have pointed or politely looked away. But here, apricots grew on a tree in the yard. The tropical plants were juicy as pickles. At Trenches Siete Via del Palma, we left our siestas and walked to the edge of the garden. We could smell horse dung in the streets below. We waved. Emilio began to sing. There was actually a house that looked like the Walt Disney Palace across from ours. And I went there a couple of years ago. I found the house we lived in, and that house was still there. Okay, when I was a kid, one of my favorite board game was Clue. I loved the characters, and I loved, the little rope and the little gun and the knife. And it was kind of an easy game to cheat at because I put the cards in the sleeve, and even my brother and sister, I were very good at it. So the agreement was we'd close our eyes, but I could peek. And of course, my favorite character was Miss Scarlet. A clue. Miss Scarlet's in the kitchen wiping off the cleaver. Though Mrs. White lies dismembered on the floor, Miss Scarlet hums like a frenzy of bees, remembering nights singing jazz at the plaza, flirting with well-heeled patrons and smoking between sets. That's how she wound up in Jean Bobby's drafting mansion, a suspect in his move. Never trust a sugar daddy who wants you to dress like a maid and dust. Watch you play sous chef to his cook, but she's in charge of dinner now. What shall she serve tonight? Quail in Colonel Mustard sauce? More than once she felt him press his waxy mustache on her neck. She's not the kind of cook to use a recipe, and she likes the kitchen to herself. Despite that shimmering page boy, that tight red dress, she'll play the 50s housewife. Plenty of knives left to sharpen. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our readers, Jennifer Jean. I apologize for the mispronunciation deeply. We're so grateful that you're here. And Kathleen Aguero, let's clap for them again.